This week on Jersey Matters, the first debate between Democratic Governor Phil Murphy and Republican challenger Jack Ciattarelli gets heated. We'll talk with Ciattarelli to get his thoughts about the debate. Predictions of a COVID winter and a rise in cases for the holidays. We'll talk with Montclair State University epidemiologist Stephanie Silvera. And now is not the time to be looking for a new car. New Jersey is experiencing sticker shock like never before. Hello and welcome to Jersey Matters. I'm Larry Menti. Election Day in New Jersey is now just 1 month away, November 2nd to be exact. There are local races throughout the state for mayor and city council and school board. Every state senate and assembly seat is on the ballot, but the headline race is for governor of New Jersey, with incumbent Democratic Governor Phil Murphy being challenged by Republican former Assemblyman Jack Ciattarelli. They had their first debate this week, and Jersey Matters' Phil Andrews was there. Phil.
Well, there are two gubernatorial debates of this kind in the entire nation this election cycle. And that, of course, is in Virginia, and this one here in the Garden State.
And the arena for this event, the New Jersey Performing Arts Center in Newark. More precisely, the venue's 2,800-seat Prudential Hall, which welcomed in an intimate crowd of 500 for the debate. Now, incumbent Governor Phil Murphy chose not to join his opponent, Jack Ciattarelli, on stage for a pre-debate photo opportunity, but made sure he was in front of the camera when it mattered.
Will you pledge right now not to raise any taxes at any time in the next 4 years?
Yeah, I already have. We're done.
Yes, you
100%.
will raise taxes?
We will not.
You will not.
I pledge to not raise taxes.
You pledge not to raise taxes at any time in the next 4 years.
At any time in the next 4 years, but I'm not making news tonight. I've been saying this for the past year.
He's raised every single tax and tolls. He has an insatiable appetite for taxes. And the reason is because he believes if taxes are your issue, we're probably not your state. He said that.
Please.
Taxes were, of course, one of the top issues during the debate, along with climate change and COVID, especially the Murphy administration's handling of nursing homes during the early days of the pandemic, in which over 8,000 residents lost their lives.
Let's just step back a second and say this was an awful, awful tragedy, overall and specific to long-term care. And by the way, every state in the nation, every country in the world has gone through this. Early on, we had no playbook. We did the best job we could, and we were explicit. And remember, these folks live in these places. They're not patients in long-term care. My mother was in a nursing home in long-term care. They live there. That's their home. So they were obviously always going to go back. But we were very, very, very clear, explicitly clear. If you go back, you've got to be separated, whether it's floor, wing, building, and the staff that serves you has to be separated.
I will continue to ask New Jerseyans the question, are you better off today than you were 4 years ago? When I ask that question all around the state and every community I go to, and I do go to every community, okay, I find the answer to that question, no.
And the line of the night probably belonged to Ciattarelli, who took a shot at the governor for his continued references to the previous president.
We're still digging out of the damage that Trump did in terms of masking and making it political. I mean, come on.
If I may, if those watching at home are playing that drinking game where you got to take a shot every time you hear Trump, I suggest they stop real soon because they're going to be bombed real soon.
And if you were counting, the total number of shots would have been 3. But more importantly, who actually won this debate?
I'm happy with my performance, but at the end of the day, it's for the people of New Jersey to decide.
There's no question who won tonight. Yours truly.
By the way, this was the first of 2 debates between these two candidates, Ciattarelli and Murphy. They'll square off again October 12th at Rowan University down in Glassboro. For Jersey Matters in Newark, I'm Phil Andrews.
Thank you, Phil. When we come back, a post-debate interview with Republican candidate for governor, Jack Ciattarelli. A new poll conducted by the Stockton University Polling Institute shows the New Jersey gubernatorial race is tightening. The Stockton poll, just out this week, has Republican Jack Ciattarelli now just 9 percentage points behind Governor Phil Murphy. That is the closest the race has been in any independent poll since the campaign started. Welcome back to Jersey Matters. As we just mentioned a moment ago, we had our first debate in the race for governor on Tuesday night. And the very next morning, I spoke with Republican former Assemblyman Jack Ciattarelli, who is trying to unseat Democratic Governor Phil Murphy. Assemblyman, thank you so much for your time. I know it's going to be a busy day for you after last night's debate. Let's just start right off with, how did you feel about it?
Well, I felt good about it, Larry. Listen, I'm a perfectionist, and I didn't feel as though I was perfect last night. Happy with the performance, but at the end of the day, it's up to the people of New Jersey to decide how we did and who to vote for.
Let's talk about Donald Trump, because I thought it was fascinating that when I interviewed you during the Republican primaries, you were being attacked for not being supportive enough of Donald Trump. Now that we're into the general, you're being attacked for being too close to Donald Trump. What do you make of that?
Larry, you're the first TV journalist, newspaper journalist to bring that up. I'm well aware of it. Listen, that's one of the fascinating things about politics. But you're exactly right. In the primary, my primary opponents were saying I was a never Trumper. The guy I'm running against now, Phil Murphy, says I'm a forever Trumper. So what's the truth of the matter? I'm comfortable where I am, and I'm confident that come November 2nd, the majority of the people in New Jersey will be real comfortable where I am too.
I also interviewed you right after the Stop the Steal rally, which has become controversial and was brought up last night. As a matter of fact, he said that was disqualifying for you to even be a candidate because you were at a Stop the Steal rally where they challenged the results of the 2016 election. I know you have said you didn't know it was a Stop the Steal rally. You thought it was a Republican rally when you went there. You weren't made aware of it. You didn't see the signs. You didn't hear anybody while you were there.
Couple things, Larry. I've never, ever said that Joe Biden was not the president. I've never not said that Donald Trump's rhetoric was responsible for the riot that took place on January 6th. And I was personally invited by phone call of the organizer of that rally, who told me the focus was on 2021, the governor's race in all 120 seats in the New Jersey legislature. I thought that was really refreshing that right after the election, we were turning our energy toward 2021. And when I got there, I didn't see anybody wearing offensive apparel. I didn't see any signs that said stop the steal. I never endorsed those type of rallies. They're wrong. We have elections in this country, and we need to respect the outcomes of those elections. And once they're over, I want our elected officials to be successful. I want Joe Biden to be successful. I think it's un-American to not root for the president. But I have another very selfish reason why I want him to be successful. And I know you know this, but of my 4 children, my oldest son is a first lieutenant in the U.S. Army. And his bags are packed and he's on red alert. I need Joe Biden to be successful for a very selfish reason, and I think it's pretty obvious.
Right, to protect your son. I thought that was a classy moment last night, by the way, when Governor Murphy pointed out that your son was in the military and wished him well. Let's get to some issues, shall we? I thought it was surprising to me that the first issue brought up was Hurricane Ida and the response to Hurricane Ida. I think it made the governor uncomfortable because he tried to change not calling for an emergency immediately to a climate change where he could come after you and talk about the difference between the two of you on climate change. Were you surprised that he didn't take it on head on? Because I remember very early on in his administration, he was accused of blowing a snowstorm, of not declaring an emergency during a snowstorm. And he said he would never do that again. And he has been calling emergencies almost the day before we saw a first snowflake. So this was surprising that he didn't call that. Were you surprised that he wasn't more prepared for that?
I really was. And as I said last night, if ever we needed a get the hell off the beach moment, this was it. His state of emergency declaration came 13 hours after the Pennsylvania governor's declaration. His state of emergency declaration came 3 hours after the tornado, 2 hours after the flash flood. A state of emergency declaration increases urgency and seriousness of an impending storm. We needed to get people home early that night from work. We didn't. 30 fewer New Jerseyans are with us today. But it wasn't the only time he was uncomfortable, Larry. He was uncomfortable when we talk about what happened in nursing homes. He's still being investigated by Joe Biden's Department of Justice. He was uncomfortable when we were talking about what's going on in schools. He was uncomfortable when we were talking about women. So I think what you're seeing is, for the first time, this governor is being challenged. Larry, he got a free pass 4 years ago when he ran for governor. He hasn't had a single editorial board meeting with the state newspaper in 3 years and 9 months. And for 16 months, he ruled by executive order with his choreographed press briefings. We're not going to let that happen this time around. We're going to have a full debate here about the issues that affect New Jerseyans every single day.
I will point out also, you talked about him getting a free pass. We've invited him constantly to be on this show, and he's turned it down every single time, including today. We've made an offer to him to come on today as well. And we're not even able to get his press people anymore, let alone him. But
Larry, no governor in the history of New Jersey has ever gone 3 years and 9 months into their term without sitting down with the editorial board of the state newspaper. Not once has he done that. Not once.
I was surprised that it took so long to get to taxes. Historically, property taxes, high property taxes in New Jersey has been the number one issue. You rightfully, and I'm glad you did this, tied it to the school funding formula. Could you explain the problem with the school funding formula and why that's so important?
What a lot of people don't realize, Larry, is that the state income tax here in New Jersey can be used for one purpose and one purpose only by Constitution: state aid to our 600 school districts. $14 billion comes into Trenton. $14 billion goes back out to our 600 school districts in the form of state aid to schools. It's supposed to be used to offset the property tax to support schools. And we've got 60% of that aid going to less than 10% of our districts. And I'm telling you, there are communities that have experienced significant revitalization, like Jersey City and Hoboken. How is it fair that $1 million home in Jersey City and Hoboken pays less in property taxes than a $400,000 home in Toms River, Hillsborough, or Parsippany?
One of the clearest differences between the two of you seem to be on vaccines and mask mandates and vaccine mandates. He seems to adamantly support vaccine mandates. When I heard him defend it so vehemently, I thought to myself, there's one coming.
There could be one coming, just as there could be a lockdown coming. I'd like to hear him commit to there not being any lockdown, because the fact of the matter is 3 out of 4 adults in New Jersey are vaccinated, and that's why we're doing so well. The transmission rate is once again below 1. Our hospitals are doing a great job managing the 10 to 15 patients each has, some of which are in the ICU. But Larry, listen, I've been very clear on this. I'm vaccinated. I promoted my vaccination on social media. I encourage people to get vaccinated. Do I believe government has a right to tell you you have to take a medicine? No, I don't. I'm all about promoting, preserving, and protecting the public safety, and I will. But at the end of the day, I do believe it's my job to provide people all the information they need to make a very informed decision, and then it's their choice. His mandate is not a mandate for teachers. They have a choice: get vaccinated or get tested twice a week. But what's interesting about that is the testing doesn't start until mid-October. So those teachers will be with our students for 7 to 8 weeks prior to the testing starting. That's another one of those terrible inconsistencies that just infuriates people.
And what you're alleging is because the teachers union supports him, they get special rules.
10 million reasons, Larry. Over the last 5 years, NJEA has given Phil Murphy's dark money PAC $10 million in contributions. And I got to tell you, there are a great many rank and file union teachers, hardworking middle-class New Jerseyans that ain't happy about it.
Mask mandates for children, would you get rid of it?
I would, Larry. Based on where we are right now, I believe that's a decision that should be made by parents. And I do think when we start putting masks on kids as young as 2, that we could possibly be doing more harm than good. I read every bit of science on this. There's docs on both sides. There was just an op-ed recently in the Wall Street Journal by Johns Hopkins and tough faculty clinicians who said that you're inhibiting learning and you could be adversely affecting the intellectual and emotional development of the child.
Jack Ciattarelli, thank you so much for your time. I know you've got a busy day and a busy campaign ahead. And as always, we appreciate you taking out some time for us. Jack Ciattarelli, Republican candidate for governor. We did reach out to Governor Phil Murphy and his communication staff asking for an interview, but did not receive an answer. Still to come on Jersey Matters, New Jersey is in good financial shape for now, but a new report says we have trouble ahead if we don't change our ways. We'll talk with Regina Egea from the Garden State Initiative next. Welcome back. Governor Murphy likes to brag, and for good reason, about a state budget that has a $10 billion surplus. But a new report is out that warns that unless the state deals with its long-term systemic economic problems, those good times will not last. Here's my interview with Regina Egea, president of the Garden State Initiative, the group that put together that report. Regina, thanks so much for doing this. Your organization recently released a financial statement about the future of New Jersey, and you saw some underlying problems. Can you explain?
Sure. Thanks for having me, Larry. It really is a report that looks back at a 2012 report that identified many issues that we had fiscally in the state, and it really looks at updating that. And unfortunately, many of the problems that were true back in 2012 continue to be true today. And the reason we thought it was important to issue this report now is because that there are a lot of spending going on in the state that's being funded by one-time cash that has come into the state because of COVID relief. And the state has received over $9 billion in COVID relief. And it has escalated spending a tremendous amount, in fact, over $11 billion over the first term of Governor Murphy. And the concern we have is that instead of solving the problems that have been long lasting for our state, that we instead are spending on things that don't give us a sustainable future. Hence the title actually of the report, which is Toward a Fiscally Sustainable State. And we analyze and both offer some recommendations about how we could better use those funds to give us a longer term, brighter future.
Right, because things look really good right now. I mean, if you just look at it in a snapshot, there's a budget surplus, the Moody's rating went up, the first full payment of the pension plan was made in years. So what is the problem?
So a couple of things. One is to clarify, the Moody's rating was a change in outlook, not a change in rating. And they even talk about their concerns that these are non-recurring revenues that are funding some of those brighter, pictures that are being painted in the state. And back in the spring, there were others that were talking about a concern about a fiscal cliff, because the spending, the escalation spending is being funded by money that will no longer be true in about 2 years. And, we think that we ought to look at how do we build a structurally balanced budget. What that means is we only spend at the rate we bring in on a recurring basis. And we use these one-time cash to solve problems like unfunded pension liabilities and restructuring our pensions so that it's sustainable long-term, like many other states have done, like funding and modernizing the healthcare programs that we have for the public workforce. That needs to look much more like other states and the private sector. We could afford transitioning those employees to those future programs with some of this money instead of continuing to build liabilities that we don't know how to solve.
But you keep talking about the stimulus payment, but there was a borrowing of $4 billion too that is added on top of that. That will have to be paid. Absolutely.
In fact, it'll drive an additional $500 million in interest payments starting next year. I mean, the finances are being, structured in a way that they push off and snowplow problems that have been talked about, by the way, by both parties, by many study commissions, including Path to Progress, as well as back in 2005, that Governor Murphy was part of a group that looked at this. These are longstanding problems, and they're not being solved. They're being papered over. I think specifically what I said, papered over by the cash that is enabling us to get through this budget and not confront what we have to confront.
Well, you certainly got underneath the skin of the Murphy administration. They released this statement saying the Garden State Initiative is simply a political organization which is led by Chris Christie's chief of staff. This report, which boils down to standard GOP talking points, fails to mention that many of the problems have come from the past.
All right.
What do you say to that?
Well, three things. One is these are not GOP talking points. These are longstanding. As I said, both parties have talked about it and recognized we need to solve it. Number two, the study was done by two incredibly experienced and credible individuals. Tom Healy, who worked at Goldman Sachs at the same time Governor Murphy did, as well as has run a development fund and was an assistant treasury in President Reagan's administration. The other author is Thad Calabrese, who's a finance professor at NYU. So these are independent individuals who have looked at the facts and have laid out the case for why these issues need to be resolved. And lastly, while yes, I was the chief of staff to a Republican governor, I'm also a 30-year business executive. And I am one that is trying to offer policies that really help the state think about what's a reasonable and possible future that could be better for New Jersey than it is today. So I guess as a closing comment, I'd also be interested to note that none of the facts in the report were commented on, just an attack on me, an attack on the Republican Party, which this organization is nonpartisan, and one that really didn't take much creativity to offer.
It doesn't sound like they're going to do it, though.
I think the legislature, who are also on the ballot, and unfortunately, I think that many of these issues that should be talked about now during the election season are being suffocated by other discussions. And it's unfortunate because I think that many of these legislators who will be in office and beyond the next 2 years, they are the ones that are really going to be saddled with trying to solve this problem, that in terms of false expectations and a rate of spending that will just not be sustainable.
Thanks for your time. I really appreciate it, as always. Regina Egea, president of the Garden State Initiative. Next on Jersey Matters.
Up next on Jersey Matters, we'll introduce you to a young man who had a very special wish for his 12th birthday. Find out what it is coming up next on Jersey Matters.
Welcome back to Jersey Matters. I'm Larry Menti. New Jersey has the second highest COVID-19 death rate in the country. Each and every day in this state, another family suffers a tragedy. Our Kimberly Kravitz introduces us now to one such family and a young man who has channeled his loss into motivating others to get vaccinated.
It was here at the Glen Ridge Police Department that Officer Charles Roberts reported to every day, until the 45-year-old police officer died of COVID-19 complications. And now the memory and great legacy is what's left behind.
He was just a great person in general. He would move out of his way in any way possible for another person. He would always put other people before him. And he was loving, he was caring.
Gavin Roberts reminisces about his father, a man that was adored and hailed a hero by the community. And that's why Gavin had this special wish for his 12th birthday last week.
My wish was to get vaccinated and just help people like my dad would do. And it was kind of my way to honor him in a way.
Officer Roberts passed away before having the opportunity to receive a COVID-19 vaccine. According to the Officer Down Memorial page, COVID is the #1 killer of law enforcement officers in both 2020 and 2021.
On April 21st, he collapsed while he was in his bedroom. He was quarantining just to be safe, but he didn't know he had COVID, and he collapsed, his heart stopped, still didn't know he had COVID.
Roberts said her husband eventually recovered from COVID-19 in the hospital, but his brain was too far damaged from a lack of oxygen. He was taken off life support the day after Mother's Day.
Young, healthy people, though, do die. And I can't imagine that COVID, if you have underlying medical problems that he doesn't even know he has, would help that situation at all. I read that he was a marathon runner, that he was in great shape, but we know the marathon runners die of cardiac arrhythmias.
That day I was 100% scared on what this virus did and could do in the future, and it really scarred me for life.
This isn't really like your typical COVID path with the heart just stopping, and the nurses in the ICU in Lenox Hill Hospital said, no, actually we do see that a lot. The testing back then was very slow, and like I said, they had mislabeled his test, so that was another delay.
People, healthy people, and we saw many of these people, particularly early in the pandemic, would get blood clots in their typically lower extremities. A piece of that blood clot would break off and it would shoot up to the lungs and heart. We call that a pulmonary embolism. And if it's big enough, they just collapse.
Officer Roberts was a father of 3, a 20-year veteran in the local police department, and the unofficial mayor in town.
He knew all the moms more than I did because I was always at work and he would do the drop-offs and pickups at the elementary schools.
He would have a smile on his face every day before work, and he would always have a smile on his face when he came home, when he saw us.
Next month, Officer Roberts' name will be added to the National Law Enforcement Memorial Wall in Washington, D.C.
He put others before himself in everything he did. He was a coach to my kids in soccer and baseball. He would come home really tired because he really put all into his work. He worked 12-hour days. He would take on overtime whenever he could or side jobs, to support the family. So, it's a real loss.
Anyone that lives, works, or studies in New Jersey over the age of 12 is eligible for the COVID-19 vaccine. Reporting from Glen Ridge for Jersey Matters, I'm Kimberly Kravitz.
Welcome back to Jersey Matters. I'm Larry Menti. There are warning signs that we are headed into another COVID winter, which means things are going to get even worse just in time for the holidays. Here is Dr. Stephanie Silvera, epidemiologist and professor at Montclair State University. Thanks so much for agreeing to do this today. I was fascinated by the article that you were quoted in about an expected COVID winter. What do we expect coming up in the winter season from COVID-19?
So I think we can expect a certain increase in the number of cases, simply because that's what we would typically see for any respiratory disease during what is typically in the past been called cold and flu season, which will probably now be cold, flu, and COVID season. As we move indoors, we're going to be coming into more contact with people in spaces with less than ideal ventilation. So, it's New Jersey. Nobody wants to keep their the windows open in New Jersey. And so we are at greater risk of just coming in contact with people who may be sick. There are ways to reduce that risk, right? We know some things that we can do, limiting our social circle a little bit, getting vaccinated, wearing a mask, but we're going to have a mix. And I think that by community, we're going to see different rates across New Jersey.
Are we concerned at this point of further mutation and a possible mutation that will be vaccine resistant?
Viruses mutate. This virus has been mutating on average, at least one mutation every 2 weeks. That's not unexpected. Some of them, most of them, thankfully, don't change how the virus behaves. Every now and then we've had one like Delta that changes the transmissibility and seems to be creating more severe illness, particularly amongst people who are unvaccinated. So as long as the virus is spreading, there is that potential to have a vaccine-resistant mutation arise. That said, if we can keep our rates low in general and reduce transmission, that's what keeps those variants from occurring.
Well, the number one way of keeping the rate low and stifling transmission would be for people to get vaccinated, but it doesn't seem like that's going to budge. As long as that continues, that we only have a vaccination rate of 60%, 70%, are the vaccinated at risk at all?
So people who are vaccinated right now seem to be having a fair amount of protection against severe illness. So there have been those breakthrough cases, but people who are vaccinated are more likely to have mild or asymptomatic illness and feel fine in a few days. People who are unvaccinated at this point are the ones who are really ending up hospitalized and are driving the mortality rates, unfortunately. So right now, the best thing you can do to protect yourself from this variant or any other variant is to get vaccinated. And then in the meantime, if you're around people who aren't vaccinated, continue to wear a mask.
You probably deal with this all the time. Give your best pitch to the unvaccinated.
So, what's interesting is I think that we tend to lump people who are vaccine hesitant and anti-vaccine all in one group. And there's a lot of reasons why some people are hesitant to get the vaccine, but are willing to have that conversation. And then there are some people who simply do not believe in vaccinations across the board. And so I think we need to make sure that we tailor our messaging to those groups. There are also populations in New Jersey and across the country who still are, low information. They're not necessarily watching the news as much as some of us might do. And they still are not sure how to get the vaccine or think that they might have to pay for it. And so I think we need to make sure that we continue to get out the message that this is free and safe and now readily available. So there's no reason not to get it from that perspective. And then for people who are hesitant, really try to understand, where is that hesitancy coming from? For some people, they're concerned about their reproductive health because there's a lot of misinformation and disinformation in that area. For other people, they're concerned and there's a lack of trust both in government and in pharmaceuticals. And I think some of that is justified. And, we've just gone through the opioid epidemic. So that does not help our pharmaceutical companies in terms of their credibility. But what we need to understand is there's a difference between the scientists doing the work, who are really doing this because they are trying to protect lives, and then the bottom line economy or economics of the pharmaceutical companies. Public health professionals like myself believe in the vaccine. We believe in the people who are doing the work. And right now, if you are vaccinated, your risk of being hospitalized is much, much, much lower. And your risk of transmitting the virus to somebody who is at high risk also decreases.
We're going to get a lot of people coming back from college, coming back from schools, visiting this time of year as the holidays are coming around. And as you pointed out, they're all going to be doing that inside. And every time we seem to have a holiday, a couple of weeks later, there is a spike in cases, and that's to be expected. Is there any way to beat that?
Right. So if we're talking about college students coming home for holidays, I think one of the best things that they can do is test before they go home and then isolate as much as possible after that test. Remember, if you're negative on the day of the test, you can still catch it the next day. And so really being mindful of our behaviors leading up to those events. If we're going to have family gatherings, I would feel personally most comfortable gathering with other individuals who are fully vaccinated and doing testing and really thinking about who's going to be at the table. If you're going to have unvaccinated family members around an older individual who may have some pre-existing health conditions, you're putting them at greater risk. And so, we might need to either find ways creatively to keep the windows open, to eat outdoors. I know a lot of people invested in those outdoor heaters last year, and try to really create environments that lower that risk of transmission.
A vaccine mandate and a mask mandate for the holiday dinner table, that's an interesting concept. Thank you so much for your time. You're a wealth of information. Dr. Stephanie Silvera, epidemiologist and professor at Montclair State University. Still to come on Jersey Matters, another concern about the holidays: not enough workers. We'll talk about it next. Welcome back. A stubborn shortage of workers in New Jersey is causing some real panic as we head into the holiday shopping season. Here's my interview with journalist George Jordan, who has been reporting on the hiring crisis for NJ.com and the Newark Star-Ledger. George, thanks so much for doing this. We have been talking on the show a lot about the hiring crisis, and I think it's to the point where we can call it a crisis. And your series, and I just read the second part, so I want to focus on that. Your series on NJ.com and the Star-Ledger is talking about the problems that small businesses especially are having hiring people. And I thought it was fascinating. You dealt with I didn't even think of this, the holiday season coming up and the problems that businesses are having. Talk about that. Talk about especially the angst about the holiday season.
Well, the challenge for businesses large and small is trying to attract seasonal, low-wage earning employees. A lot of people, it appears to be a few things going on, is that one, many of them have been on unemployment and have saved their money. Two, they have moved on to other occupations that they're not accepting the $11 an hour. In restaurants particularly, it used to be a real haven for the starving artists, but Broadway has been dark. and the theaters have and playhouses have been dark. So they're not starving artists anymore. They have moved on to something else. And lastly is immigrants, is that particularly with restaurants and food service and public facing sort of things, that was usually a haven for new Americans or aspiring Americans. And a lot of them have flew the coop because of the immigration enforcement of the last few years, or have just gone back home.
But you pointed out in the article, and this is what got me, that Starbucks was offering, I believe you said $17 an hour. They were offering great benefits, including healthcare, and they were and college reimbursement. And they had to close down at 3 o'clock because they didn't have enough staff. If those type of benefits and pay aren't enticing people, there seems like there's something else going on.
Well, that's true. And I think that there are a number of people who are afraid to go back into the workplace because they're afraid of the virus. That they don't forget that there's a good percentage of adults who have not gotten the vaccine. So they run the risk of a potential catastrophic health event if they get sick. And I just think it made some people really afraid to go back into public facing jobs. And they're afraid to take the vaccine for all of these reasons, some of which don't make any sense.
So what does that mean coming up for the big buying season, for Black Friday, for the holiday season? These businesses depend on that time of year, some of them to turn a profit. Are we looking, especially as the cases continue to rise and there's this talk about a COVID winter, are we talking about another serious problem with the economy?
Well, I believe that portions of the economy are going to stumble, but I think there's going to be a lot of overtime, and I think that they're going to figure out a way to make it. I think that the big box e-commerce stores are going to figure out a way to get their logistics moving and to make this happen. I believe that it's going to be a struggle for the traditional shopping mall, for the mom and pop store that's in a central business district.
As I said, you're doing a 3-part series on the new economy and the problems people are having hiring. I believe your next part is on how all of this is changing the way we do business, right?
Yes, and what the solutions are. The businesses are going to have to start working together. And all of this working for 11 hours and working for $11 an hour and killing yourself all day for that, those days are gone. It's not going to happen anymore.
His name is George Jordan. You can read his latest piece was just this week on the seasonal hiring, and part 3 is coming up when?
Sunday.
On Sunday. You can read it on NJ.com or in the Star Ledger. George, thanks so much for your time today. Journalist George Jordan, NJ.com and the Newark Star Ledger. Coming up on Jersey Matters.
The automotive industry is struggling and customers are paying the price. More on that story next.
Several viewers have sent me some amazing pictures of our full harvest moon, but one question kind of sticks out. What's up with that rainbow around it? First, I think it's important to understand that despite that classic song, the moon doesn't actually create its own light. Everybody knows that, right? What we see here on Earth is a reflection of the sun's light on the surface of the moon. I know, it kind of ruins the song now, right? Dancing in the light reflected by the moon. Yeah, it doesn't have the same vibe. Anyway, that light can actually create some neat visual optics when clouds are present very high up in the atmosphere. This usually occurs when a warmer air mass moves in. Tiny ice crystals form at high altitudes, and since they are hexagonal in shape, light is easily refracted and the full color spectrum can be seen. We sometimes call it a 22 or 46 degree halo because they can only appear at a 22 or 46 degree angle between the sun or moon and the viewer. They can be seen around the sun or moon, and the principles of their formation are the same. And in the winter season, this can mean that there's a snowstorm approaching. Oh boy, did I go too far? For Jersey Matters, I'm Nor'easter Nick.
Good news, New Jersey. We are getting a tax break at the gas pump. On Friday, the state gas tax dropped 8 cents. Each October, the tax is recalibrated based on supply over the past year. Last year, the tax rate went up 9 cents, so we almost broke even. Welcome back to Jersey Matters. The pandemic has caused a myriad of economic problems, including a shortage of computer chips, which has plagued the automotive industry. Jersey Matters' Jennifer Marin spoke with the owner of a local dealership who says he's never seen anything like this. Jennifer.
Larry, that chip shortage is due to a couple of reasons, all stemming back to the COVID-19 pandemic. And the owner of Morano & Sons dealership tells me that the situation isn't improving anytime soon. Buying a car right now isn't exactly easy. Just ask John Swadrak. He's been on the hunt for a car for his son.
It's tough to find a car. We were going to lease, but we went to the leasing company the other day. There's no cars.
And the used car market isn't any better.
Used car market's tough. They don't have a lot of supplies. Usually this lot's full.
Ralph Morano, owner of Morano & Sons Auto Sales in Garwood, says John's right about his lot.
This time of year, you can't pull in or out of here. You have to park in the street. So it's that disheartening, and we got them spread even up front, so it looks like we have more than we really have.
Morano, who's been selling cars for 48 years, says he's never seen the industry so depleted.
We've been through the energy crunch, we've been through 9/11, we've been through ups and downs with gas going up, going down. So it's been crazy, but nothing like this. This is beyond what anybody thought could happen.
The COVID-19 pandemic has affected the industry in more ways than one.
I mean, you have the workforce, which we're very thin in. We have parts, which we're very thin in. The availability of which we're very thin in, and you put it all together and you just can't, it doesn't work.
Aside from the supply chain shortages caused by factory shutdowns, Morano says the global shortage of computer chips is a big concern.
The chip is beyond belief what happens with new cars. You know, your power windows, there's nothing in the car that doesn't go through this chip. So without that, they can produce the cars, but nothing works.
According to information provider IHS Markit, chip makers had an increase in demand when people began buying laptops and other work from home or virtual school necessities, hence the shortage. The lack of new cars has drastically increased the price of used ones, and people like John are feeling the effects.
We got to stay in a budget, and we got to up our budget now because the pricing is tough to get. I know lack of cars means the prices are going to shoot up a lot.
We usually keep 175 to 200 cars in stock all the time. We're about 45% of our inventory.
Still, John is staying optimistic.
I hope to get these chips in these cars and we can start, to a normal life and finding cars again.
But Ralph doesn't see that happening anytime soon.
I don't see it going back to normal for at least a year.
Industry experts say that going a bit further for a car, being flexible with the make and model, and trading in an older car can all help you save some money. For now, reporting in Garwood, for Jersey Matters, I'm Jennifer Marin.
Thank you, Jennifer. My commentary is next. My commentary is usually about politics or the media or a news event that captures our attention. But not today, because there's something happening in America that deserves all of our attention. Most importantly, it deserves accurate information. Pregnant women are not getting the COVID-19 vaccine. Only 31%, less than a third of expectant mothers have been vaccinated. That is the lowest vaccination rate for any demographic of Americans. Look, I get it. This is all still new, and moms-to-be are frightened. The majority of them, I believe, would go out and get vaccinated if they just had to worry about themselves. But a mom will do anything she believes will protect her baby. That's why I want to share some new and important information with you, because getting the vaccine will not only protect you, but your unborn child. There have been more than 125,000 cases of COVID-19 among pregnant women. Of them, 22,000 have been hospitalized. 161 have died. And it's getting worse. 22 of those deaths happened in August of this year. That is the highest monthly total since the pandemic began. Pregnancy weakens the immune system. which is why it's twice as likely for a pregnant woman to end up in intensive care and 70% more likely to die. And not getting vaccinated also can have a negative, even deadly effect for the unborn child. That's why the CDC just issued an urgent alert to get more pregnant women vaccinated. That's why TV networks and stations are now interviewing pregnant women who came down with COVID-19 across the country. On NBC News, we met Savannah Moore from Indiana.
I told my husband, I was laying in bed, I feel like I'm drowning. Like I cannot breathe.
In Indiana, Savannah Moore was 33 weeks pregnant when she was admitted to the hospital with COVID. At one point, her heart stopped. She was on a ventilator and sedated. 10 days later, she woke up to find out they had delivered her daughter 7 weeks premature.
All I could do was cry, saying, I'm putting my baby in harm's way because I was just too hard-headed not to get the vaccine.
Good Morning America introduced us to Samantha Kelly from Illinois, who also went into a coma after getting COVID-19.
Doctors were able to safely deliver her baby. She's now recovering.
It's a lot of decisions and being thrown at you, and you try and as a mom make the best one, but unfortunately I think I made the wrong one and I should have gotten that vaccine. I hope every pregnant woman gets it.
Savannah and Samantha were fortunate because when they came out of their comas, their babies were fine. That's not always the case. When a pregnant woman is infected with COVID-19, there is an increased risk of both stillbirth and premature birth, and an increased likelihood of the newborn ending up in an intensive care unit. And despite misinformation and disinformation, especially on the internet, several studies have proved that pregnant women suffer no increased risk from the COVID-19 vaccine. In fact, a new study out just this week shows that a pregnant woman passes her COVID-fighting antibodies to the unborn child through the umbilical cord, so the baby is born with immunity. There is simply no reason to avoid getting the COVID-19 vaccine when you're pregnant, and a whole lot of reasons why you should. Now, I know what you may be thinking, and you're right. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a scientist. I'm just passing along information to you. So I urge you to check with your doctor or a medical professional. I urge you to find the research and find the statistics for yourself, because I believe when you do, you'll make the right decision. Yes, this is an unusual commentary for me, but I believe we all have a shared responsibility to protect our future. I'm Larry Menti. We'll talk again soon.